Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Spellbinders has come out with a new propagation garden collection, and I recently used it in a video to create this chemistry themed card. Today I'm going to do a vintage lights card. Now I thought this laboratory glass die set, when you turned it upside down, it kind of looked a little bit like vintage lights, and wanted to play around with that a little bit. So I'm choosing ones that I think look like vintage lights. I looked online at some pictures, and these ones are fairly similar. So I have both the inside part of the die set as well as the outside part. The inside part, when you're using it for beakers and the actual laboratory glassware, it just adds some extra details. The outside part does a bit of a shadow, but the inside part also has an outside cutting line. So when you use these two together, you get basically an outline. So you can use it to create an outline for your laboratory glassware. For this, I'm going to be using it to create an outline for my light bulbs. The first thing I want to do is do the outside part of the die, and I'm going to cut it with some vellum. I want my light bulbs to be a little bit frosty. I'm going to be using some tiny lights in here, and I don't really want to see all of the wires. I don't mind if some of it is kind of visible through the vellum, but I don't want it to be completely transparent. So I chose frosty vellum in order to get kind of more of a little vintage glass look. So once those are done, I'm going to use both the inside and the outside parts of the die set, and I have some cream cardstock here, and I want to put those together and create an outline. I want my light bulbs to have a little bit of a creamy yellow colored outline here. And I started working on it, but found that my die cutting machine was in the way, so I moved that out of the way. I tape my dies down here because I want to make sure that nothing shifts. So I used the same tape that I used when I die cut with the vellum. And now I'm putting those inside parts in there, trying to make sure that they are as even as possible, and then taping the two dies together. Now, when you take this apart from die cutting this particular piece, don't remove those pieces of tape. Keep them taped together because we're going to use that a couple times. So once those are all taped together, I can put my sandwich together for my die cutting machine and put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6. And for this, all I need is that outline die cut bit. Any of these inside bits, I'm just putting aside. I may use them at some point for another project. I will put them in a little Ziploc bag and just keep them with the die set so that I have these pre-cut pieces ready to go. But all I need for this particular card is this little outline piece. So I'm putting those to the side, and then I'm using some liquid glue, putting a fine little bit around the backside of those die cuts and gluing the outline part of the die cut to my vellum piece of the die cut. Once I have those glued together, I'm just putting an acrylic block on there, making sure everything stays nice and flat while it dries, and it frees my hands up to glue some more pieces. I'm doing this to all three of the lights here. Now, I chose to do 3 different shaped lights because I felt like it. You could do all the same shape light if you wanted to have just a few of a different or of the same shape, or even just do a singular light bulb. That would work for this as well. Now I am making a larger card. That's why I chose 3 different light bulbs here, but you could easily turn this into a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card and use just 1 or 2 light bulbs. So with all of those sitting and drying, I have some adhesive backed foam here that I was going to use to cut out the outline for adding some dimension to this. Now I end up scrapping this plan, not because the adhesive backed foam won't die cut. It die cuts beautifully, but once it was die cut, it was really hard to get the backing off of the adhesive because these pieces were so thin. And when I finally did on the little thin light bulb, the foam itself worked so much that I don't think it was going to give it the structure that I wanted it to give. I wanted it to give it some dimension. I wanted it to give some structure, and I wanted it to give some space for the wires from my little tiny lights to go. So I end up scrapping this plan after not being able to get this adhesive off the backing of the foam. But I wanted to keep this in the video just because when I go to my next solution, if anyone is thinking, you know what, adhesive back foam would be perfect for this. That's what I thought too, but it was really hard to get the backing off. And you can even see I grabbed the other piece of adhesive foam, the one that I die cut out of, to test the backing, just to make sure that it wasn't that it had been sitting for too long. I've had it for a little while, but not an extremely long amount of time. So the backing does come off of it, but because these pieces are so fine and thin, it took a little bit. This one was the only one that I actually ended up getting the backing off. And then you can see how the foam kind of ruffles, and I didn't think it was going to look very nice. So in the end, I scrapped that, and I just chose some scrap pieces of cardstock and die cut 3 of each of the outlines, and I'm going to glue those together. That's going to give it the dimension that I want it to have, as well as the structure. That cardstock is going to be a lot more solid and be able to hold up the light bulbs better than that foam back adhesive is going to. So I did it 3 times. I did the first one here on screen, and the rest of them I do off screen. Again, I only need that outline bit. Any of those inside bits, I just put them aside, again, possibly for a future project. There's no point in throwing them away, because I may at some point be able to use them. And because they're already die cut, might as well keep them. So I glue each one of those together with that liquid adhesive, and then I put them underneath a acrylic block to hold it flat, make sure everything dries nice and neat. I want to make sure that those die cuts are lined up really well with each other. And I want to make sure that I only put a thin amount of, or a little amount of that adhesive. I don't want to put a lot of it. I don't want it oozing out of the sides. I want these pieces to glue together really nicely, but I don't want excess adhesive on there, because that's just going to end up looking sloppy. So I put 2 of each together, and then I went and put the 3rd layer on top of that. And once that is done, I'm going to put those on the back of my outlined vellum pieces. These are really, really easy to do. They only take a few minutes to add the layers together. So in the end, this was definitely a much better solution than the adhesive backed foam. When I first thought of that idea, I wasn't really considering how narrow and thin these outlines were actually going to be. So it makes sense that the cardstock is just going to give it a lot more structure, and you still get the same dimension. I ended up only doing 3 layers of each one of these die cuts, but if you wanted more dimension to it, you absolutely could do 4 or 5 if you wanted that little bit of extra dimension. 3 ended up being enough for what I was going for, but you could absolutely, if you wanted, put as many layers as you want to add that dimension to it. So with those cardstock pieces together, I can put those on the back of my vellum pieces, and again put that acrylic block on there just to make sure that everything dries nice and flat, nice and straight, and again freeing up my hands to work with other things. And then once these light bulbs are completely done, I can start working on the rest of the card. Now I chose to use just a light cream for the outline. You could use whatever color you wanted. If you wanted something a little bit more bold, you could absolutely do that. I wanted it to have an outline to it, but I wanted it to be fairly subtle. So with that done, I can choose, or I can lay out how I want my light bulbs to be on there. I chose to do them a little bit random. You could line them up if you wanted to. These are the tiny lights here, and I have the tab out of them so that when I turn them on and off, it goes on and off. They come with a tab in there, and then you can just unwind them. Now, this is a longer string, and you can actually cut off any excess that you want that you don't need for your card or whatever project you're wanting. Just make sure when you cut that excess off, it is the side that is the most opposite end from the battery pack. You don't want to be cutting it off of the battery pack, or else your lights are not going to work. So I'm going to complete my card front first, and then I'm going to be cutting off the excess. Now, I don't happen to have a stamp set that has any light themed sentiments to it. This collection, the Propagation Garden collection, has a sentiment stamp set, but they're all plant-based, and then there's a few generic sentiments there. And I didn't want any one of those ones for this particular card, so I just typed some up and put them printed them out onto some heavier weight cardstock so that I could cut that sentiment for this card. When I laid out my light bulbs, I put a little pencil mark where I wanted an opening to go for my light thread to be popped up through there. This card front piece is 4.5 by 6.5. My card itself is going to be 5 by 7, and that yellow piece to the side is a mat, and it's 4.75 by 5.75. So I have a little bit larger mats around my piece than I did on the last card. If you saw the last card that I did with this die set, I did a chemistry themed one, and I had wished at the end that I had made my mats a little bit bigger. So I did do that for this particular card. Now, the one thing that I didn't do for this card that I really wish I had when it came to the end of it, and by that time it was too late, is if you saw my chemistry themed one, I used a black Copic marker and put a faux mat around this piece of cardstock. Before gluing any of these light bulbs on there, I would suggest doing that. It's just a way to frame it and pop it out more. And if black is a little bit too stark, I think a gray would also look nice. Just a way to frame it. Once I was done with the card, I liked it, but I think like a medium tone gray around the outside of it would have really finished it off nicely. But I didn't want to chance doing that with the foam tape that I have on the back of it once I put it onto my card. Too big of a chance of messing it up. So you can see that I'm working one light at a time, and I keep testing that strand, making sure that everything is working. I'm gluing one light bulb at a time, and because I have the wires underneath, I'm not able to do my usual putting the acrylic block on there to hold it in place while it is drying. So I do use my hands, hold it in place firmly for several minutes just to make sure that that glue has time to set before moving on and working with the next light bulb. I want to make sure that those lights stay perfect and don't start lifting off of that card. Once each one of them has dried enough so that I know that I can start working on the next light bulb, I can pop the next part of the string of lights up there. Make sure to bend it how I want it to be looking underneath that vellum light. And this is just a wire, so it's very easy to bend and move and manipulate exactly how you want it to. It's wire, but it doesn't break really fast or really easily. So you can see how I bend it in half to stick it through the card front, and that's not a problem. It's not going to break it or anything. So you don't have to worry about having to be really gentle with that wire. It was very easy to work with, and I had absolutely no issues. So now that I have all of my lights done, I've tested everything, I make sure that it works, I can cut off the excess light, and that just gets tossed. There's no way to use that. So I don't have that extra wire underneath everything. With all of that done, I can start taking this wire backing here, and I'm just going to tape it in place just to make sure that it doesn't move. It's secure underneath my card. I don't have to worry about anything. Now this battery pack here is actually meant to be, you can change the batteries on it. So if it dies, you can change out those batteries. There wasn't a way that I could think of doing that on the front of this card to make that battery pack accessible. So for this particular one, once it dies, unless you're going to disassemble the card, there's not really a way to do that. I thought about it for a while, but there wasn't a way that I thought of that looked nice that could make it accessible. So I'm just taking some double-sided tape. I'm taping that to the side because I want that on and off switch to be visible and be able to turn it on and off. Again, testing it between each and every step just to make sure that everything is working as intended. I didn't want to get to the end of the part or end of the card being together and then test it and find out that I had made a mistake at some point or something happened and the lights no longer worked. I'm taking some strong foam adhesive and I'm putting them on the back of this card front here. I do end up also adding some foam pop dots because the double thickness of this foam adhesive wasn't quite enough to make it thicker than that little battery pack. I think there are different types of lights out there. This is the only one that I had on hand, and anything else was not able to come to me in time to create this. So there might be other options that would work. I was happy with this option. I really like the way that it turned out, and I love the interactive element to cards. It always is fun to create different cards that have different uses or purposes to them. I think it's just a fun way to create. Now that I put those double layers of that foam tape, I realized that I needed some more dimension. So I have some foam pop dots here. I didn't have any more of that tape to use up. So I'm using some of these foam pop dots over top of those tape strips. And it just adds the perfect amount of extra dimension to make sure that that is popped up off of the card and I don't have any bowing from that little battery pack. Now I will be creating another video and more cards with this Propagation Garden collection because there's so much in here and there are some other pieces that I just can't wait to play with. But I just had the chemistry and the light bulbs in my head from the Laboratory Glassware die set, and I had to get it out of my head. I always love looking at different die sets and thinking of different ways that are a bit unexpected to use it. And by getting it out of my head, I can start working on some of the other ideas that I have. So this card is pretty much done. I have that front piece onto the mat and I'm going to glue the mat part onto the front of the card. Now I have some sentiments that I printed out and want to cut down for the front of the card. This particular card, I have a sentiment for the front of the card, and then there's one for the inside of the cards. So the front of the card is going to say, never let someone dim your light. And then the inside of the card is going to say, simply because it's shining in their eyes, or something to that effect. I looked on the internet for some different light theme sentiments, and this is one that I found that I liked. So a little bit harder to trim it down to make sure that that sentiment was in the center. It's almost in the center, but it is slightly off. I could have trimmed it even more and had a bigger mat on the inside of the card, but I didn't want to do that. I left it as is. Once that is completely dry, I can put that on the inside of the card. The sentiment for the front of the card, I decided I was going to trim it shorter, but I ended up deciding to create one that was going to go the full length of that card front. So that piece from the front of my card is 6.5 inches. So I'm going to cut that yellow mat so that it is that 6.5 inch length. And then I'm going to put my sentiment on top of it and then trim that down. So I put that sentiment below my yellow piece and adjust where I want it to go. And then when I pick it up, I put my fingers towards the end, where the end of that piece would be, and then put my glue on there. That way I can make sure that I don't put too much excess glue and get it on my mat, although it would be easy enough to clean that off if I did. But I did want to try to make as little mess as possible. So now I can glue that to the front of the card. I just press it down for a few seconds. No need to put an acrylic block on it at this point because those light bulbs are a lot higher. It wouldn't sit on it anyways. And then I can put my sentiment to the inside of the card. I do put my acrylic block on there to let that sit for a few moments and just let that completely dry. Now, the one thing I wanted to add, and I don't have a stamp for this, is I kind of thought if someone didn't happen to notice that switch on the side, because it's very subtle, I wanted to write on and off there so they knew which way to put it on and which way to turn it off. Again, wish there was a stamp for that, but it worked out okay. So I just used a silver gel pen for that just to make sure that that was visible, but it wasn't too dark. And my pointing out the chemistry card there, I wish that I had that outline that I had on the chemistry card. And like I said, I think like a medium gray would look really nice with it. I think that would frame it nicely, but it wouldn't take away from the light bulbs themselves. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you spending time with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.